Hello, friends. Lee Seacamp here. You're listening to No Small Endeavor. This is our unabridged interview with New York Times bestselling business author Dan Heath. Dan and his brother Chip have authored numerous New York Times bestsellers. This book we're discussing today, Dan wrote, entitled Reset: How to Change What's Not Working. I'm kind of geeky about this stuff, even though, my field is in moral philosophy, moral theology kind of stuff. I've found myself for some years being really fascinated with business books, at least certain kinds of business books, because oftentimes they're looking at ways in which we can help organizations or individuals make some sort of real progress in their lives. And here Dan has spent years studying change and how to change. And of course, this is central to what most of us experience, is central to our own lives. How do we make change in the direction that we want to make change? So it's a fascinating conversation. Here, Dan is looking especially at change in organizations, but it often has very helpful personal applications, familial applications, and work applications in your day-to-day life, where most of us spend the great bulk or a large bulk, maybe a third of our lives in our work context. Fascinating conversation. Then at the end, we talked about Dan's new podcast, What It's Like to Be, where he interviews people from all walks of life about what it's simply like to be a person who does their work. He especially told a story about a guy that sells beer in a baseball stadium. That is a lovely, beautiful story. Great interview. Here's Dan Heath. Hey, friend, if you didn't know, I started a newsletter a while back that comes out every 2 weeks. I've been delighted to hear from so many of you about positive response to the newsletter. We call it the No Small Endeavor Notebook, where I riff on themes and topics related to our podcast, giving you additional material for thinking and doing in your own quest to make sense of what it might mean to live a good life. Join us by going now to nosmallendeavor.com and sign up there. Again, go to nosmallendeavor.com to sign up now for our free No Small Endeavor Notebook newsletter. You know, it can be hard sometimes to quiet your mind at night with all that to-do list for tomorrow running through your mind, but bowl and branch sheets can help you truly unwind with a softness so extraordinary that your whole body just relaxes into sleep. Bowl and Branch's signature sheets are made free from toxins with the finest 100% organic cotton. They feel buttery soft just right out of the package, and they come with a 30-night worry-free guarantee. They're ethically crafted by expert artisans who earn fair wages, and if you're looking for a new set of sheets, then go check out Bowl and Branch. You can tell the quality immediately, and that sweet color selection, it made me happy to put our new Bowl and Branch sheets on our bed. Feel the difference an extraordinary night's sleep can make with Bowl and Branch. Get 15% off plus free shipping on your first set of sheets at bowlandbranch.com/NSE. That's Bowl and Branch, BOLLAND, branch.com/NSE to save 15% and unlock free shipping. Exclusions apply.
Brace the rudders! Raise the sails! Raise the sails!
Captain, an unidentified ship is approaching. Over.
Roger. Wait, is that an enterprise sales solution?
Reach sales professionals, not professional sailors. With LinkedIn ads, you can target the right people by industry, job title, and more. We'll even give you a $100 credit on your next campaign. Get started today at linkedin.com/results. Terms and conditions apply.
Dan Heath is the #1 New York Times bestselling co-author or author of 6 beloved business books. His books have received numerous honors, have been translated into 35 languages, and have sold over 4 million copies worldwide. Dan has an MBA from Harvard Business School and a BA from the University of Texas at Austin. He hosts a top 5 Apple Careers podcast called What It's Like to Be. And in every episode, he interviews someone from a different profession: couples therapist, homicide detective, cattle rancher, and more. His latest book is Reset: How to Change What's Not Working. Welcome, Dan.
Thanks so much, Lee.
Pleasure to have you with us, and been paying attention to your work and your books for a long, long time. So I'm pleased that we get to visit together today. So your latest,
thanks for the invitation.
Yes, your latest book came from a trip to Chick-fil-A.
That's probably a little bit too narrow, but Yes,
Yeah.
I think the seed was planted there. So this was a night in the pandemic. I was sent out to fetch dinner for the family, and I get there, and there's like 50 plus cars in line. It was the longest line I'd ever seen at a drive-through, and my spirits are immediately crushed because I hate waiting in lines like that. I hate sitting around, and so I start frantically trying to formulate some lie that I can tell my wife about why I came home without the chicken nuggets she had requested, and couldn't come up with anything. So I kind of reluctantly rolled into line, and it didn't take 30 seconds for my emotions to kind of flip, because this was the most sophisticated drive-through line I'd ever seen. I mean, it was just rolling forward like just a clockwork that's always running. And it didn't take me more than, I would say, 10, 11 minutes to get through that 50-plus car line. And I was just dazzled by this. I was just thinking, how is Chick-fil-A so good at this thing that there's lots of people trying to do, but seemingly only they have kind of taken it to this Jedi master level? And so later I followed up with the owner-operator, a guy named Tony Fernandez. And anyway, this led me on a path that the original question that I thought I was trying to answer was, how do you make things run better? And this Chick-fil-A drive-thru was sort of the quintessential example. This is a thing where they have figured out how to make things run better. And so I got into several months of research on that topic, into operations literature and so forth. And then at some point, my frame just kind of shifted, and I started to get more interested in, what if you're Arby's down the street and your drive-thru is not like a Clockworks, and it does not flow smoothly, and you're doing great to finish, 10 cars in an hour. Like, if you're in a situation where you feel stuck or kind of, hemmed in by the gravity of the way things have always worked, what do you do in those situations? And that was where I eventually landed with the book is how do we change what's not working?
Yeah. So I've got lots of questions about the different parts and pieces of the book that we'll discuss as much as time allows. But if you were to give us kind of like a 25, 30,000 foot overview of how you answered that question, give us a paragraph length answer to that.
Yes. So the heart of the book is a 2-part framework. All of my books are built around kind of practical knowledge. Like, my books are not literature. They're frankly not beach reads. They're intended to help you do something different in your life or your work. And so in this case, what I'm advising is, if we feel stuck, if we feel like we need a reset, there are 2 moves to make. One is to find leverage points, which means we're looking for places in a complex system where a little bit of investment or effort yields a disproportionate return. So that's part 1. And then part 2 is, it's not enough to have the aim to know where the bullseye is. We have to take the resources that we have. And in this world, there's not often a surplus of resources. So we're probably stuck with what we have. And so the question is, how do we restack the resources we have to push in a new direction? So that's the heart of the book. Find leverage points and restack resources to push on those points.
So in No Small Endeavor, one of the kind of driving questions that we have is, exploring what it means to live a good life, which is another way of saying we're interested in conversations about human flourishing. And how would you say that this kind of work relates or not to kind of rich questions about human flourishing?
I think it would be overclaiming to say this is a book about human flourishing. I'll start there with that general disclaimer. I think it's primarily a book for teams and organizations and people, for that matter, who feel like they're not achieving what they want to achieve. And so there are personal applications in the book that might hew a little bit closer to that. Like, one that comes to mind is a couple that was going to therapy for their marriage. And, like all couples that go to therapy for their marriage, there's a lot of bitterness, a lot of ill will, a lot of conflict in their past. And in a situation like that, put yourself in the shoes of the therapist for a second. You have this very entrenched set of habits, and you have, an hour a week with them? So you have 1/168th of their available capacity in a week, to try to make some progress in a set of conflicts that may have gone on for years or even decades for that matter. That is the very definition of a situation where you need to find a leverage point. You can't fix everything. You can't even try. But if you can find, glimmers of hope, maybe that gives you the potential for progress. So one example was a therapist I talked to named Laura Heck had this beautiful exercise she calls sticky note affirmations. And the idea is simple. Every time you go to brush your teeth, guaranteed 2 times a day, while you're brushing your teeth, you have a Post-it notepad and a pen, near the toothbrush holder. And as you brush, you write down something that you appreciate about your partner. And then, you stick it up on the mirror. It can be something quite small, thanks for making coffee this morning. Or I appreciated how you talked to Johnny about college. Like he really respects your opinion or whatever. And so when I first heard this from her, I thought it was about the kind of immediate glow that you get when someone praises you or compliments you. Like your partner comes in, sees the note, they feel good. It's about the rush of good feeling. And she said, actually, it's not about that. It's about the creation of the notes and the fact that next time you brush your teeth, you're going to have to come up with something to write down. And so what it does is it kind of rewires the way that you see your partner's behavior, right? It's training you to stop looking at all the stuff that bugs you about them, that drives you crazy, all the stuff that's, yielded bitterness and complaint, and start looking for the positives.
Yeah.
And she said, it's the lens that matters. And so back to the original question, like that's an example where finding a leverage point really does matter in terms of, relationships flourishing or other things.
Yeah, I really appreciate the care with which you answered that question. I think that, and I don't read a lot of business literature, but I read a fair amount here and there. And, the conversation about how so often the question of an end is not sufficiently articulated in business ventures. And it's just more focused on getting things done without a sufficient conversation about what's the true end of these things. And so I appreciate that you disentangled those for us. But at the same time, though, that you're pointing us back to the fact that if you do have some sort of end that we count to be an honorable one and a worthwhile one, there are better and worse ways to go about trying to get towards that end, right? And that here you give us some very practical wisdom about how we might get ourselves unstuck towards some sort of end that we have set out as a desirable end. So with that, I think that I was really interested near the beginning. You were quoting some business. Well, I'm not sure what this person's role was, but you quoted someone who said, "When we surveyed managers around the world and asked them to rank employee motivators in terms of importance, only 5% chose progress as number one. Progress came in dead last." And then you say, it's a stunning oversight. The biggest motivator of employees is nowhere on the radar of the average boss. That surprised me. I hadn't thought about a employee motivator being progress. So unpack that for us a little bit before we talk more about the...
I was surprised too. And this finding comes from a wonderful book from Teresa Amabile and Stephen Kramer called The Progress Principle. And what they did was they collected work diaries from hundreds of employees where they would just keep a log of what happened at work and, how they felt about it. And so it's kind of this rich data set. And then they mine this data set to figure out, okay, when people seem engaged, when they seem happy, what are the responsible factors? And so, in the classic managerial toolkit, you ask why is an employee happy or engaged, and your thoughts immediately go to, well, they got a bonus, or they got some praise, or they got promotion, these kind of extrinsic rewards. And what Amabile and Kramer found, by contrast, is that the number one motivator of employees was the feeling of progress on meaningful work. And I think that's such a big, powerful idea. People don't need instant rewards. Like, I actually think people are very patient when it comes to getting closer to the outcomes that they want, as long as they feel like they're making progress. So even if we're running a marathon and we've only taken a couple steps. As long as we feel like a couple of steps are behind us, the finish line's getting closer, I think people will be patient. But I think the key insight here is that if you're a leader, you've really got to be attuned to how to make that progress visible. Because, most organizational work is not as tangible or as concrete as running a marathon where you can kind of measure your progress, especially if you're in an organization of hundreds or thousands of people. The signs of progress might be buried in bureaucracy and silos and otherwise. So it takes intention to bring progress to bear.
Yeah. So let's turn then to part one, find leverage points, and explore some of these. The first one you suggest is simply go and see the work, see what's going on. So unpack that one for us a bit.
Go and see the work is a phrase from Nelson Repenning. He's an MIT management professor. And this is a very simple idea. It's if you want to look for these leverage points that are so precious when we're trying to change things, you got to get closer to kind of the front lines of the work. So if you're a hospital administrator and you want to make your healthcare better, you've got to walk the halls, visit patients, see families in the waiting rooms, talk to your doctors and nurses. If you're a factory manager, you've got to kind of walk the floor and follow an assembly all the way through the production line. One of my favorite stories in that chapter is about an assistant principal who shadows a student for a full day, a ninth grader named Alan. And so she meets him when he comes in the building. She follows him. She sits next to him in all his classes. There's a video of this that is priceless. You should see his expression. He is not psyched to have the assistant principal shadowing him for all this. When he does an assignment, she does an assignment. When he goes to lunch, she sits next to him, eats cafeteria food. And what I think is so special about this is here's a woman who comes to this building every single day, right? Her office is in the building. She ostensibly knows everything there is to know about how this school works. And yet in one day of just getting closer to the work, feeling what it's like to be a student, all of a sudden these insights start to pop out. Like one of them was, in this school, they had done a lot of talking about active learning and project-based learning and ways to kind of get students more involved and more active. And she said, sitting in these classes, it made it clear they had done a lot of talking, but it hadn't been implemented yet. Like there was still just a lot of sit there and listen to the teacher. So that was number one. Number two, I think, was a little more subtle. And it was this kid, Alan, was in a double period remedial math course because he hadn't, been up to snuff on his math scores. And so they said, oh, we'll give him some extra help. And what occurred to the assistant principal was, number one, this is a really painful thing to sit through, like 2 hours of math, especially in the lunch period. She said, it's just extracting a psychological cost. And number two, it also crowded out his choice. Like most ninth graders can choose 2 electives. He had wanted to take French and automotive. Well, now because of this double period math, he can choose one. And for the kids who had a double period reading as well as math, they have zero choice in their education. The students who are most on the bubble, right, are the ones who have the least autonomy and it's kind of backwards when you think about it. So she came out thinking, look, I can't draw any conclusions after one kid in one day, but it makes me curious. Do we have the research to back up the payoff of these courses? Because what I know now is there's a cost. And I better make darn sure there's a benefit that outweighs this cost.
Yeah. One of the ways I think about what you're describing there is, I don't know what I don't know. And if I don't proactively seek out opportunities to have myself exposed to things I simply can't know I don't know, then I'm going to miss all sorts of possible rich things that, again, might be significant leverage points in making significant change in the system.
That's exactly it. And that's what sort of haunts me about this story is the fact that sitting in her office every day, she probably thought she had a pretty good handle on the way things were running at school.
Right.
I referenced this research from psychologists on what's called the illusion of explanatory depth, which is this thing where if you ask people, do you understand how a toilet works? Or do you understand how a zipper works? And then people will say, oh, yeah. I get that. Yeah, sure. I deal with that every day, of course. And then you say, okay, well, could you just take a pen and some paper and just sketch out like the mechanism of how does it actually flush? Like what causes the flushing? Or when a zipper, when the teeth intertwine, like what's causing that? And then when you reverse it, what causes the untwining? And people kind of choke on that. And they very quickly realize, actually, I don't understand how those things work at all. And that's what's called the illusion of explanatory depth. And so in a way, it was like the assistant principal had that because she understood the school at a macro level. Students came to school, they were taught lessons, buses arrived, lunches were served. Everything seemed to be according to plan. But if you kind of get into the bowels of the system, you start to spot things that you never could have spotted at a higher altitude. And I think that's why going and seeing the work is so precious.
Right. Second one, consider the goal of the goal. I especially like this because I think so seldom do we ask. It goes back to the conversation we were having earlier, right? What are we really trying to accomplish and why? So explore, consider the goal of the goal.
My favorite story in this part is about a guy. I think we can probably all relate to this experience. He goes and buys a new truck and drives it off the lot. And then he starts getting absolutely hounded to complete a survey for this dealership. I mean, there are at least 4 different people texting him, emailing him, calling him, please fill out the survey, please fill out the survey. There's this one, he sent me this exchange on Apple Messages, sent me the screenshots. And his salesperson reached out, hey, Ryan, how you liking the truck? It's fine. It's good. I actually had the window smashed in my first night with it, which was terrible, but I got it fixed. And the salesperson is like, oh, no, sorry about that. So could you fill out the survey for it, please? It's really important. And you just realize, what is going on here? And he finally fills out the survey, and he tells me he gives it sort of an A- vibe. He was generally pretty happy with how things went, but there were some things that he complained about, like the high-intensity sales pressure and all that drama that always happens. Never hears from anyone again. They fundamentally do not care about the answers to that survey. What they wanted were the 10 out of 10s that no doubt were responsible for some kind of bonus. They were being held accountable for hitting those numbers. He told me, this is not a joke, that when he was buying the truck, the salesperson sat down with him, brought out a laminated copy of the survey, and showed him, here's what you're going to be asked, and here's what the right answer is.
Oh my.
You're going to give me a 10 out of 10, and then this. And so just take a step back from this. I think this is something that happens all the time in organizations, is we need a way to measure whether what we're doing is working or not, right? So if you run this dealership, you care. We want to give people a good experience. We want them to come back. We want them to tell their friends. How are we going to know if we're doing that? Well, let's take a survey. Let's ask the people. That's a great instinct. Let's see what they think. So far, so good. But then, the instinct of organizations is more, make number go up, increase productivity, blah, blah, blah. And so we start thinking, well, okay, let's give people a reward if they hit these numbers. Let's punish people if they don't. Let's hold people accountable. And so then all of a sudden, this kind of transformation happens where the things we were measuring to give us insight on our authentic progress are then substituting and even supplanting the whole mission. So in other words, all I care about is that you bubble in a 10 out of 10. I literally do not care what your actual experience was, so long as you give me the 10 out of 10s.
Yeah.
And so that's the point of this question, that it's not enough to just ask, what's the goal here? The goal here was to get 10 out of 10s on the survey. What's the goal of the goal? And can we continually reorient ourselves toward that larger mission?
You talk about a miracle question in this regard.
The miracle question. So there's a book of the same name by a therapist named Linda Metcalf. And I love this question. So comes from a discipline called solutions-focused therapy. And, so let's go back. Let's take another couple, maybe in marriage therapy. And the miracle question is something you would ask, and it goes like this. Imagine that tonight you go to sleep, and overnight while you're sleeping, a miracle happens. And the problem that brought you here to therapy has resolved. Poof. But no one tells you this. So in the morning when you wake up, you're going to have to kind of discover that the miracle has happened. And so the question is, what are the first few visible signs that you perceive that tell you the miracle has occurred? And what is so interesting is there's a transcript from a therapy session where there's this couple, and the therapist asks them this question, and the man says, When I come home from work and walk in the door, she would look up from her book and make eye contact and smile at me. And the woman says, well, if the miracle occurred on the weekends, we wouldn't just be hanging around. We'd be going out dancing like we used to. And there's this kind of epiphany for both of them where they realize like, hey, I didn't realize I wasn't acknowledging you when you came in the door, or that it would be important to you for me to smile. And hey, I didn't realize you still would want to go dancing, after all these years. And so what the miracle question is doing is it's taking this domain that could have been fraught, could have been filled with bitterness and negative emotion. It seems almost too big to intervene. Like, how are you going to fix a broken marriage? Too complicated. Too much water under the bridge. But it's saying, hey, the first steps are surprisingly tangible. The first step is, smile when he walks in the door. The first step is ask her out to dance. And so it's a way of making concrete our change aspirations.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a way of envisioning where you want to go, that maybe rather than simply focusing upon what's wrong, you focus on where it is that you in fact want to go. Yeah, that's remarkable. That's fascinating. It occurs to me too that could be quite helpful, even if your marriage is average or pretty good. That's a great kind of exercise, isn't it? Of saying, what would it look like if we had the miracle of the best of all possible marriages? What would be some tangible signs of that? And then see what you get from that. That could be super fascinating, I think.
Yeah, well, it's interesting you say that because I've talked to some coaches, like I talked to a Olympic archery coach, and he doesn't use the language miracle question, but it's almost like an incremental version of the same thing. So when he's working with an archer, he'll say, okay, what's your goal with this next shot? And well, I want to practice the positioning of my tricep or whatever, and then they'll do it, and he'll say, how would you score that on a scale of 1 to 10? They'd say, that felt like maybe a 7. He'd say, well, what would it look like if it were an 8? Like, what would need to be different? And then, so notice the question is sort of prodding, what's the next tangible, concrete step to get you a little higher on the scale?
I love that. That's super helpful. Chapter 4 is target the constraint. I found this one highly practical and really super. I see this guy almost as like a super leverage point, but describe that one for us.
So the constraint is the bottleneck or the limiting factor. It's the number one thing that's holding us back in our change aspiration. And so, back to the Chick-fil-A story that I started with, I come away from this experience just kind of dazzled. I later learned from the owner-operator, Tony Fernandez, they can do over 400 cars in an hour, which is a car every 9 seconds. Just, amazing. And so I asked him how they pulled this off, and he said it required diligent attention to the bottlenecks. So, for instance, in a lot of drive-thrus we're familiar with, the bottleneck might be the menu board. You pull it to Burger King, there's one menu board. The person in front of you, it's as though it didn't occur to them until they pulled up there that they were going to have a choice to make.
That's
and
right.
So they dawdle
I can't
for 3
stand
minutes.
being behind those people in line.
Amen. And the nature of a serial process is if it takes that dude in front of you 3 minutes to make a decision, well, your clock just went up by 3 minutes. The person behind you, their clock goes up by 3 minutes. And so Chick-fil-A, they just removed the menu board. There is no more menu board. And they just put human beings in the parking lot with iPads to take your order right there at your driver's side window. And the beauty of this, I have seen 6 or 7 people in the parking lot taking orders simultaneously. There is no fast food restaurant in the world that has 6 or 7 menu boards. And when they slow down, when it's 10:52 a.m., they can just be one person out there, right? And so that's an example of how, if the menu board is the constraint on the system, one way to demolish that constraint is go to this more, flex-oriented system where there's people that you can scale up, scale down. Now, one of the important things in the chapter is to realize there's always a constraint. So, by getting 6 people in the parking lot at once, you have majestically increased your capacity for ordering. And what happens next? Well,
Change
now
the constraint.
orders are flooding into the kitchen. you know?
Yeah.
And so now the kitchen's the constraint. You got to give them more help or improve their systems. And so it's this kind of, revolving, circulating, hopping of the constraint. But the payoff, it's not like it's pointless because there's always a constraint. No, because every time you whittle down one constraint, you've made the whole better. And so every time you win one of these micro victories, you've accelerated your progress toward the goal.
Yeah. Fascinating. Well, let's skip to part 2 in restacking resources and talk about a few of these. Recycle waste. You describe waste as any activity that doesn't add value. So what's it look like to recycle that waste?
Yeah, so this is like if there are any operations heads out there, waste is one of like the classic things that people talk about in the operations world. And the definition you cited, I think is so revelatory because there's a lot of associations with waste, but when you start thinking about it as any activity that is not valued by the customer, where customer here can stand in for a lot of things. It could be, a literal customer that's paying you money. It could be a patient, it could be a student, could be a parishioner, it could be your kids, right? I think about this a lot in the context. I have 2 girls, and a lot of times I'm thinking, any activity that is not valued by the customer. And trust me when I say a lot of the things that I'm saying and doing are not valued by the customer. And I think the significance for our point of view is if you're thinking about change, the hard thing about change is where are you going to get the fuel to do something new? Right. None of us have like satchels of cash on the sidelines or people that are going to rush in and help us out. So we have to take what we have and reconfigure it in a way that it accomplishes something new. And so the hope of waste is if we can find these pockets where we're doing things that actually don't matter in the scheme of things, that don't matter to the people we're serving, we can recapture some of that and move it in a new direction.
Do less and more. How does that help us?
Do less and more. So this came out of a conversation with a consultant named David Philippi. He works at an organization called Strategex. And he goes into big organizations, a lot of times, maybe service firms or manufacturing firms. And the first thing he'll do is they'll do a profitability analysis by customer. Now, we're going to go in the business weeds for a sec, but I promise this is going to circle around. So, every customer served by a manufacturer, let's go through. And if you look at what they buy and what it costs us to serve them, like what's their net profit, from most to least. And so they'll do a kind of ranking of all the customers. And Philippi said in virtually every case, what they find is the customers at the top, the best customers, are under-coddled, and the customers at the bottom are over-coddled.
Huh.
And so like one example of this that stuck with me was, he said a lot of times they find that the on-time delivery record for the stuff that these customers are ordering is actually better for the people at the bottom than the people at the top, which makes no sense, right? You think you want to take care of your best customers always, but the people at the bottom may be just buying, one-off parts, and it's easy to throw it in a box and ship it out the door, and it's easy and it's quick. The people at the top may be spending millions of dollars doing complicated assemblies, and so it takes a lot of work, and you have to manage the delays. And so if you've measured your shipping department on efficiency, for instance, it's real easy for them to just crush it by dealing with all of the, small fry and ignoring the big ones. All right, so here's where it circles around is after this conversation, I started thinking, like, isn't this a pretty good metaphor for a lot of different aspects of life? Like, couldn't we do the same, like, conceptual ranking of all of the relationships in our lives? Like, there are clearly people at the very top who we cherish the most, who give us our greatest sense of fulfillment and satisfaction, and we adore. And then there are people at the bottom who we do not adore. Maybe they're a lot to deal with and they spark anxiety. They might be outright toxic. And isn't it almost certainly the case that we're over coddling some of those relationships at the bottom at the expense of the people at the top? And so this just kind of implanted itself in my head. And I started to think, isn't this really a recipe for change of all kinds? Like, so the presenting problem is we want to do something new, but we don't have extra resources to do the new thing. Where do we get the resources? Well, let's start thinking about, of all the things we're doing, Like, what's being overcoddled? Can we steal time, energy, resources from the overcoddled and give to the most important, the most valued, the undercoddled at the top?
Yeah. I'm remembering again repeatedly in interviews I've done over the last 2, 3, 4, 5 years. One of the things that keeps bubbling up in some way or the other is simply the disproportionately large importance of intentionality. And here you're pointing us to that in one particular way, right? We typically are not intentional about asking these kinds of questions, and that there if a little bit of intentionality seems to go a long way. But I don't know, any reaction to that notion?
Absolutely. In fact, I was talking to this consultant, David Philippi, and I brought up the relationships thing. I was like, hey, this may be weird, but if you think about this in terms of relationships, and he said, oh, absolutely, that's the way I think about it. And he gave me this beautiful example. He said he was leading a client workshop on some of these ideas, and afterwards the client asked him out to dinner. And if you're a consultant and the client asks you to dinner, like, you go. That's just like what you do. But he said he paused and he said, I'd love to go to dinner with you. Here's what's on my mind. I've got a 13-year-old at home that loves to play soccer, and I've got an 11-year-old that loves to play video games, and I've got an 8-year-old that wants dad to read a book, and I feel like the amount of time I've got left where they still want to play soccer with me and play video games with me and get books read to them by me is all too finite. And so with respect, I think I'm going to go home and play soccer and play video games and read a book, and maybe we can do the dinner another time. And so that's just a really tangible, everyday example of how you can, reallocate your own resources, to put it in a dorky way, to accrue to the most valuable people in your life.
You suggest an exercise there in that chapter on a quadrant exercise, things to start, things to stop, things to do less of, things to do more of. Describe that for us a bit.
Yeah, this came from a friend of mine who said at a retreat for his organization, they drew a 2x2 up on the whiteboard, and one part of it was, what are we going to stop doing? What are we going to start doing? What do we want to do less of? And what do we want to do more of? So stop, start, less, more. Now, I think most of us have the sense of there's 2 of these 4 that are way harder than the others, and they are stop and less, right? Everybody likes the start and more. It's exciting to think about the new thing, the exciting thing, the new ideas. But as I say repeatedly in the book, change is not about and. Change is about instead of. And I think the instead of is painful because it means to do the new thing means by definition we have to take that time and energy and resource from somewhere. But I think it's a good discipline for us is that for every new thing we want to start, like what is the commensurate stop or do less part?
It has been so delightful to see more and more listeners like you sign up for NSC Plus. Our growing community is made up of intelligent and thoughtful people looking for a holistic approach to human flourishing. Signing up for NSC Plus is also a way to support the show and the work we're doing, and in fact, we depend upon that kind of support. But in addition to supporting the show, you'll get exclusive access to bonus content, and the No Small Endeavor you've come to love will be completely ad-free. In fact, you won't even hear ads like this one. So go to nosmallendeavor.com and click Join NSC Plus to become a member of our community today. Join for as little as $5 a month. Again, go to nosmallendeavor.com, click on that red button that says Join NSC Plus to become a member today.
Hey, it's Paris. You know I love sparkly things, right? Like stars. Duh. And thanks to Hilton and AutoCamp, I just slept under them. Picture me serving looks by the fire outside my luxurious Airstream, making s'mores with the kids, while a national park is our backdrop. The great outdoors meets Hilton hospitality. That's hot. Explore all the new ways to stay at Hilton.com. Hilton for the stay.
With a major selection of the looks your kiddos love starting at just $4 in the Walmart app, a new school year means a stylish new them. Who knew? Find skater skirts and Crocs that say, I'm casual but cool. Sparkly sneakers that say, it's my classroom, you're just learning in it. And preppy polos that say, I'm the teacher's pet, even if they're mommy's menace at home. Find their favorite styles starting at just $4 in the app. The Walmart you thought you knew is now new.
Obviously, there's required a bit of facilitation of motivation in all of this. So you have one chapter on tap motivation. Describe to us how we might make some progress there.
One thing that's interesting in the corporate world, so any listeners that work in a business, you've probably heard the phrase buy-in. And buy-in means if I'm a leader, I'm going to try to get you to want what I want. That's buy-in. I'm going to get your buy-in. And it's not that I think that's a bad idea. That's basically just persuasion in disguise. And I think persuasion is great. And there's another way to kind of harness people's motivation, which is the most important fuel for any change effort, professional or personal. Like there is no change without motivation. And what leaders rarely do is just kind of figure out, hey, what do people want to do today? So if you imagine a Venn diagram in your mind, and one circle is like, what's on people's wish list today? I promise you, every person on your team, if they were made CEO, they would be like, we're going to do more of this. We're going to stop this. We're going to change this policy. There's a bundle of stuff people want to do. And then if there's an intersecting circle, it's like, if we succeeded at change, what would that require of us? Like what bundle of activities and behaviors? Wherever the intersection is between those two circles, what's required and what's desired, that's where you should start as a change leader. It's like the simplest change model in the world. Start with what people desperately want. But a lot of times it doesn't work that way because leaders have kind of pride in authorship. Like leaders want to go off in a back room, come up with the plan, and then come out and sell the plan. But what I'm arguing is often that's backwards. Often you can get somewhere faster by being attuned to what people want already.
Now, obviously, you've been thinking about change for a long time, going back to your book, Switch, How to Change Things When Change is Hard. So in thinking about change for all these years, what would be some, maybe 2 or 3 takeaways for you in most significant ways to facilitate or to make important changes in one's life individually or organizationally?
Yeah, I'll give you my my top 3, and some of these come directly out of Switch. One is that information rarely sparks change. I think every person listening to this right now has something in their life. I'll say your life, just to personalize it. There's something in your life that you're doing right now. It might be eating or drinking habits. It might be some relationship that you're in. It might be a self-destructive pattern of behavior like procrastination. There is something you're doing that you have all the information that you need to know it ain't good for you and it's not what you should be doing in the long term, and you persist in doing that thing, right? All of us fall in that camp. So information is not enough to spark change. Change is usually sparked by emotion, and it's sustained by motivation. And so I think there is a continued fallacy where we think that we can inform others into change or even inform ourselves into change. So that would be probably my number one. The second is, I think it's a lot easier to clone success than to fix problems. This is something that I talk about both with my brother Chip in Switch, and then again in this book we're talking about, Reset. That's the notion of studying bright spots. So, your kid brings home a report card, and it's like C minus, C plus, B minus, B, B plus. B plus is the bright spot, right? As a parent, you're tempted to, what is this C minus? What in the world? I mean, we need to reduce your screen time, blah, blah, blah. It's the rare parent who kind of flips that around and says, hey, you got a B plus in science. Like, what's behind that? What were your habits there? Might we learn something that's useful in another situation? Or if you're a parent with a teenager, you may not have a utopian relationship, right? There's probably some struggles. Probably a lot of times when you both end up frustrated or irritated with each other. But it's not always bad, right? There are times when you're clicking, when you feel like things are going really well. Those are the bright spots. Can you understand those bright spots with an eye toward replicating them? And so that that's a reliable way to fuel change efforts is pay attention to what's working, even if it's only in limited situations. What's working? Can we understand it with an eye toward doing more of it? And then third, I would say I do not believe in willpower. I think willpower is a fickle friend. and so especially for personal change, maybe we all have the right intuition about this, that if you're on a diet, I mean, one strategy is to keep a pantry full of Oreos and Cheetos and just fight a daily willpower battle and resist. Another strategy is to throw them all out on the first day of the diet so that they do not exist in your home. And I think we've all had the experience that road number 2 is much more likely to succeed. And so I think if we can kind of take that same insight and push it across different areas of change, we'll be better off.
Yeah. There it's a the way I like to think about what you described there about willpower is that it's the more helpful application of willpower in places that's really going to make a difference, right? So I can actually choose to take all those chocolates and stuff out of snacks.
Oh, that's a great point.
And throw them away. But I'm going to deplete. I'm not going to win by sitting there and trying to use my willpower to fight it over and over and over again. Because as various studies have shown, willpower is analogous to a muscle. And you can make it stronger, but it's going to wear out at some point, kind of every day. And so
it's exhaustible. Yeah, that's right.
Another thing that I've been reminded of a couple of times in our conversation today, especially with that second thing that you were saying, study the bright spots, is I've people who listen to our show would know that, I've said probably a number of times how I'm a fan of Dag Hammarskjöld, who was like, famous Secretary General of the UN back in the 20th century. And he had this little book called Markings that they found after he died. And he had one point where he says, and he's kind of right. He knows people are going to read this, but he's writing these things to himself, reminders to himself. And one of them is just this little aphorism that says, "You can never save yourself by a not to, T-O, by a not to. You can only save yourself by a to, a T-O." And I thought that is so helpful, right? We spend so much time focused on what we shouldn't do or what's wrong. And instead saying, no, what am I trying to live for? What's the purpose of all of this? And so quickly we can make such progress that we couldn't make otherwise if we'll just switch that around, I think.
That is such a good point. Yeah, and I think that kind of rhymes with this bright spots idea where psychologists tell us we have a bias for the negative. Like if you show people 2 photos, they'll dwell more on the negative scene. And if people keep journals or diaries, they'll spend more of their time rehashing the negative things that happen in the conflicts than the positive. And even the number of emotion words in the English language are far more negative than positive. And so it takes, back to your point about intention, it's not hard to look at bright spots. It just takes intention because our lean is the other way.
Yeah, I've found myself recently, academics are notoriously cynical and critical because, we've been trained by years and years of that academic hazing in graduate school to think that way and to look for problems, with an argument. And and so there's a place for that, but it can engender a sort of cynicism. And so I found myself recently thinking, what would it look like if I just have an intentionality about I'm just not going to feed that kind of approach of us thinking about our community life or who we are in our work, but instead simply try to point to something more constructive or something more hopeful or something more positive. Because it seems to me that can make a profound difference in our relationships and the communities that we're a part of and what we're striving to do. So, well, thank you so much for this great conversation about reset. Super helpful. I highly recommend it for listeners, and I find quite a few things here that I want to keep not just ruminating on, but actually put into practice in thinking about my own life and our own business. So thank you for that. I'd love to turn to your podcast, What It's Like to Be, where you explore vocations of various folks and kind of explore what it's like to be them and to do the kind of work that they do. But I'm wondering first, though, why this question as the premise for a show? Was there some sort of experience that led you to want to do this particular show?
It was a couple of things. I feel like I just have an unnatural curiosity about what other people do in their work. Like I remember, it's been years now, a plumber came to my house and I had a problem with the toilet, and I did the thing where I thought, well, remember we were talking about illusion of explanatory depth. I was like, oh, I'll just look in the tank. And I looked in the tank, immediately realized I had no knowledge of any of the parts there, and so called the plumber. So he comes out, and I just find myself thinking about, like, how does he think about somebody like me that's just an idiot? Like, does he look at me with contempt? Or am I like the best kind of customer because like he can shine in my presence and
in changing that washer? That's right. Yeah.
That's right. That's right. And, you know, what was the nastiest job he ever had to do? And like, if he has a really good day and goes home psyched, like, why is that? And I didn't ask any of those questions. I was too chicken. And then later, kind of a second moment, I was sitting at Thanksgiving dinner with family, and I just remember looking around the table, and there's so much I knew about everybody. And I certainly knew like what their job was. I could have like recited their title or employer, but I didn't really have any clear sense of like, what does a day look like? Like, what do you actually do? And these are people where I know their favorite sports team, and I know their childhood stories, and I know, you know, do they like cranberry sauce? And I had not a clue like how they spend most of their waking hours. So I think that was some of the soup that led to the idea. Like in every episode, we just bring in someone from a different profession, like a cattle rancher or a forensic accountant or a professional Santa Claus. And I just pepper them with 100 nosy questions about what it's like to walk in their shoes.
Huh. As you were describing that, I was flashing back to our pre-taping conversation, and you did the very same thing with me. You immediately started asking me questions about what it's like for me to do what I do. And some of the work that we do.
It's hard for me to turn that off. Yeah.
Which I love. I love that. I think that's fascinating. What would you say in all of these fascinating conversations? Like you've got this beautiful conversation with a hospice nurse, and she's talking about accounts of what she's seeing at the end of life, and it especially stuck out to me of, you know, these kind of observations about whether or not reconciliation happens and the kind of restlessness that may engender in someone's end of life. Or you're talking about a brain surgeon and you ask him the question about regrets. And I think, oh, what a fascinating question to hear a brain surgeon answer. Or an Irish bartender talking about his matchmaking as part of what he does. You know, so all these lovely kind of conversations. But I wonder if in all of those conversations, are there any particular life lessons that you've learned by asking these kinds of questions?
I think probably the number one insight from me personally has just been, it has greatly expanded my sense of meaning in work. You know, I think maybe I had too narrow a conception of, you know, what would give someone meaning in their work. And I'll give you an example. The very first episode, which we chose for a reason, is with a stadium beer vendor. Guys, Howard Hart spent decades, you know, just walking up and down the stands, and primarily in the Baltimore baseball stadium. He worked for basically the entirety of Cal Ripken Street, just as a point of trivia.
So this is the guy walking up and down saying, cold beer, cold beer.
Cold beer, exactly right.
Yeah.
Exactly. For, 30 plus years we're talking about. And I remember when we booked this interview, I was thinking, oh, this will be fun. It'll be different.
Yeah.
You know, I'll probably learn some trivia about beer and get some fun drunk stories or something. No, it went in a totally different direction. I mean, this was a guy who loved his work. And one reason was, something I didn't realize, was he was working the same stands every time. So he got to know these people, you know, season ticket holders. And I asked him at one point, I was like, how many people do you think you would recognize on the street and like know their name? He said, over 100. I was like, oh, so you created like a makeshift community out of this. And he had this beautiful reflection where he said, you know, over the course of my life, I sometimes hear from my family, you know, Howard, you wasted your life. And he said, I didn't waste my life. I loved what I did. And I know I brought something special and positive to the people that I served. And I know that they brought something positive to me. And could I afford a trip to Europe? No. Could I afford a new sports car? No. But I am really proud of what I did. And I would want people to think, you know, he was kind, he was thoughtful, he was of service. And, you know, I'm like sitting there tearing up, listening to a stadium beer vendor talk. And it just kind of expanded my mind in a way that has subsequently been expanded again and again and again in these conversations where, you know, I come in with this bias that, well, what is meaningful work? Well, it's you're at the top of an organization, or your work is consumed by or helpful to thousands or millions of people. Like it's defined by scale or status or hierarchy. And then I keep meeting these people that are just living rich, satisfied, fulfilled lives in places you wouldn't expect.
Fascinating. I'm thinking about Paul Weidell's book. He's a Catholic moral theologian, and he has a book entitled Happiness and the Christian Moral Life. And in the introduction to that book, he talks about how ethics at its best is helping train us in such a way so that we, at the end of our lives, we can give an account of our life in which we would say that we were happy. And I think a lot of people don't think about that's what ethics is at its best. But I think that's a provocative kind of definition of ethics as a discipline of saying, how can we give an account of our lives so that we can say, yeah, that was a good life, that was a happy life. And I hear that in your friend who was the beer vendor there in the stadiums, that he can look back at his life and say, I was happy, it was a good life, and I got to be kind, and I got to be of service, and got to have community. That's beautiful.
And it reminds me, that quote reminds me of a daycare owner I talked to, Brenda Hawkins, spent her whole life running a daycare out of her home. And I asked her, you know, where did the drive or the desire to do this come from? And she said it basically came from her childhood. Like she'd had kind of a broken home. And so she said her pain fueled her passion, and her passion fueled her purpose. And to hear her talk about the environment she's built for these kids, I mean, it is just beautiful. The warmth and the playfulness and the amount of trust she shows in them. And she's been doing it so long, she's now taking in the kids of the old kids that she had as a 4-year-old. You know, now they're old enough to have their own kids. And I was just thinking about, again, this is not something the Wall Street Journal is going to write about, right? It's not high pay, it's not high status, not high power. But I mean, imagine how contented she's going to feel at the end of her career, how tangible the work she did, how tangible the service that she provided. And I love moments like that.
Yeah, lovely. Any other particular story that you've encountered in doing all those interviews that continues to stick with you, become a companion to you?
So many. A Christmas tree farmer, a guy named Sheldon Corsi, works in Ohio on a 100-acre farm, and he just takes such pride in the work. I mean, and when I say he takes pride in it personally, he hand shears every single Christmas tree on the lot. I mean, we're talking about tens of thousands of trees, hand shears with this 18-inch blade. So just picture this guy. I mean, he's in his late 60s now. Manually whacking a tree like into the shape that fits his vision of what a Christmas tree should look like. And to hear him talk about it, there was just such pride. And he said, you know, I've worked this 100-acre farm for 40 years. I know every inch of this place. You know, you could bring me out in the dark and I would not stumble. And he said, you know, there are days when I'm on autopilot and I'm just doing my thing. And then there are other days where, you know, I'll walk on the top of a hill and I'll just look out across the land and I'll just think, man, I've got it made. And that's what I keep hearing from people is, I've been surprised how many different people use the same phrasing. Like I've got the best job in the world is something I've heard from a Christmas tree farmer and an ocean lifeguard and a tennis coach and a welder. And so it's been great for my brain just to have more empathy and more understanding in different directions.
Yeah. Yeah, that reminds me of another conversation we had with a well-known theologian, Stanley Hauerwas, and I got him telling this story about, I don't forget the gentleman's name that he was telling the story about, but he was a shepherd and had gone to Oxford to study writing and was a super smart guy and a really good writer, but went back home to be a shepherd. And, he's still writing poetry and so forth, but he was a shepherd. And Stanley was telling about how one day he's out there being a shepherd, and his reflection is, "This is my life. I want no other." And this is the sum of what it means to live life well, right? Is that you can look at your life and say, "This is my life, and I want no other." And
that's beautiful.
Those are beautiful images that resonate with that. So,
and it's interesting too. I mean, on that note, the Christmas tree farmer, I thought had some really provocative he said from time to time he would kind of look around, in mid-career and think, I've got friends who are doing all these fancy things and making money and don't have to go and, shear trees every day, easier lives, and kind of wonder, like, what have I done, And there was, I think it took, back on this notion of like conscious effort and intention, I think it took a kind of mental acclamation, like, no, this is a choice. Are there different things I could have done? I'm sure. Maybe some of them would have been even better, but this is what I've chosen, and I'm going to value it.
Yeah.
So one of the things I've gotten curious about, and I don't really have any answers, is just, it's so affecting to hear people that fit their work so well that they say, I can't imagine any other life, or I can't imagine any other job. It makes you wonder, like, did they make something of it? Like, could the stadium beer vendor have been, a pharmacy tech and been just as happy because he was just one of those people that will kind of make lemonade out of lemons? Or was it about the fit? Was it just something about his personality and his interest that just snapped so perfectly with the trade? Or is it some blend? It's just gotten me interested in what yields this sense of purpose.
For me, I would think it has to be a blend. I don't know, just reflecting upon my own life, because I've certainly gone through a lot of times of thinking, should I have done such and so? Should I have done this? Why did I choose to do this? But I think I do things that I think are a really good fit for me, but it's also been a process of a sort of, as you were saying, a mental acclimation to saying, okay, no, I can't do everything. None of us can do everything. We have to choose something, and we have to focus on some narrow little bit of life. And so why not let this be a beautiful thing that I get to do, and just be grateful that I get to do this?
Yeah. And I think, one thought that just occurred to me at this moment is a lot of the people whose reflections I most appreciated were people who didn't seem to have the more disease. Like, the Christmas tree farmer was not thinking, like, how can I buy up 7 other farms and, kind of get some scale? Or, the ocean lifeguard, who was just a beautiful talker, there was no sense in which he was trying to expand the scope. It was like a lot of the people that really found satisfaction had a pretty well-defined scope of influence that may not have grown much, if at all. Like the daycare owner, it's not like she's dealing with 500 kids now and it was 5 in the past. No, it's always been about the same cohort. It's just, how can I kind of acclimate and draw more value and more sense of meaning from, a fixed plot of land, so to speak.
That counterintuitively, again, for us, perhaps in our culture, that contentedness is the key to satisfaction, not getting more and more and more. The kind of real potential evils of greed to us personally and socially. So, hey, so you ask lightning round questions to your guests. So let me give you a few.
Lightning round.
Yeah,
okay,
like lightning round. So one or two sentences. What's the most insulting thing one could say about a writer?
There's so many insults. I think the one that would be most wounding is just, it's boring. Like, it's just literally not worth the time to continue to read. Yeah, that would get me.
What phrase or sentence strikes fear in the heart of a writer?
This has happened to me, so I can tell you exactly. Someone's coming out with a book that's on that same topic. So this happened with Chip and I, my brother Chip. We wrote, our first book was called Made to Stick. I mean, we know nothing about anything. I mean, first book, learning everything. And I mean, it was probably 9 months before the publication date. Turns out our editor calls us kind of panicked, saying, there's another book that's coming out 2 months before yours that's called What Sticks.
Oh, no.
And I just felt, my stomach sink to the floor. Like my career was already over before the book even came out. And so naturally we panicked. We had a good solid panic. And it turned out okay. It turned out that despite the similarity in the titles, that the book was in a very different direction. It was primarily about advertising, and ours was kind of a broader sense of communication. But that struck fear.
Yes, I imagine. What's one habit that ranks among the most important for you in your life professionally?
A habit in my life professionally. I think that I'm not always writing. Sometimes there are long periods where I'm thinking of the next idea or interviewing or researching. But when I'm in a writing mode, man, there is so much power in discipline and momentum. Like I sometimes tell other writers, it's better to write 100 out of 120 days than it is to write 300 out of 800 days. Mm-hmm. Just doing the same thing, pushing the boulder up the hill. Like the seventh day in a row that you write is so much easier than the first, and the 17th day is so much easier than the seventh. Just because you're kind of building both the literal habit of sitting down and putting words on a page, but it's also like there's not as much cognitive overhead to kind of get yourself back in the story and back in the sense of what you're saying. So that's what I would say.
What would you say is one habit that ranks among the most important for you in your life personally?
Habit in my life personally. Let me ponder that. There is no sense of novelty or pioneering here, but just reading to my girls at night, at bedtime, young girls.
Yeah.
And I just get so much joy out of that. And I wouldn't trade it for anything.
Yeah. Those are some of my most fond memories with our boys, and have very acute sensory recall of episodes of reading to them. So that's beautiful.
Right.
All right, last one. What's one lesson you've learned that you wish you could have learned earlier than you did?
Oh, so many. Let's see. How do we whittle this down to one? This is maybe a little too tactical for the spirit of the question, but because I'm a writer, and that's the way I identify first and foremost. It's like trust the reader's input earlier. For the past couple of books, I've been increasingly like inviting them into the process, which is very uncomfortable for me. I kind of have, by nature, I kind of have this artiste persona where I want to like go off in my hole and create something and then unveil it. But, the unveiling thing is not great. What you need to do is bring people in at the 30th percent mark and say, hey, here's some ideas and story. What's resonating, what's not. And then you go back and do some more and you get some more feedback. And I have found that liberating, just to kind of get out of artiste mode and more into service mode. Like this, as I said earlier, like this is not art. This is intended to help people. And if you want to help people, you have to ask them, is this helpful? Or what are you finding helpful? And I wish I'd known that kind of from the beginning.
Been talking to Dan Heath, and the #1 New York Times bestselling co-author and author of numerous books we've been discussing today. his most recent book, Reset, How to Change What's Not Working. As well, you might want to check out his podcast entitled What It's Like to Be. Dan, been lovely to be with you today. Great conversation. Thanks so much.
Hey, thanks a million, Lee. What a treat.
Got some good news for your ears. More of that good stuff is coming up. And even better news for your hair. The best hair care is at Sephora. They've got all kinds of products for every kind of hair. From brands like Amika, Kerastase, Day, and K18. You knew where to get great audio. Now, you know where to get great hair care too. Sephora, good news for great hair. Shop hair care now at Sephora.com.
This episode is brought to you by Nespresso Virtuo Coffee Machines. Ready to enjoy the bold flavors of barista-quality Nespresso iced coffee at home? Simply fill a glass with ice and press the brew button on your Virtuo Pop machine to enjoy rich double espressos roasted to stand up even when chilled. Refreshingly bold iced coffee. Refreshingly easy to make at home. Visit Nespresso.com to shop now.
Our thanks to all the stellar team that makes this show possible. Christy Bragg, Jacob Lewis, Carrie Harmon, Jason Cheesley, Sophie Byard, Kate Hayes, Mary Evelyn Brown, and Audrey Griffith. Our theme song was composed by Tim Lauer. Thanks for listening, and let's keep exploring what it means to live a good life together. No Small Endeavor is a production of Tokens Media, LLC, and
Great Feeling Studios.
This episode is brought to you by FX's Alien Earth, the official podcast. Each week, host Adam Rogers is joined by guests, including the show's creator, cast, and crew, in this exclusive companion podcast. They will explore story elements, deep dive into character motivations, and offer an episode-by-episode behind-the-scenes breakdown of each terrifying chapter in this new series. Search FX's Alien Earth wherever you listen to podcasts.